Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star Sports podcast presented by First Federal Bank. It's May 23rd, and I'm Blair Kirchhoff. Chiefs begin OTAs later this week, and on today's show, beat writers Herbie, Teope, and Jesse Newell will tell us what to expect. We talk mostly defense today, and the Chiefs likely are still in the market for a defensive end. Or is the rotation set with Frank Clark, George Karlaftis, Mike Danna, Joshua Kaindoh, and Turk Wharton? We also take a look at the linebacking core and the secondary. So let's get going. Talking Chiefs. Well, it's spring football time in the NFL. College is long past spring football, but in the NFL, OTAs are this week, and we've got Herbie, Teope, and Jesse Newell here to talk about what's going to happen with the Chiefs over the next several weeks. And Herbie, let's start by just kind of defining what OTAs are. What do teams like the Chiefs do during OTAs, and what do they want to get done? What is there to accomplish?
Yeah, the Chiefs officially enter what's known as Phase 3 of the offseason workout program. Over the past month and a half, they've gone through Phase 1, obviously, and Phase 2. And it's kind of like a ease them into before we get you on the field for team drills. Over the past month and a half, they've gone through a lot of individual type sessions, classroom settings, learning new plays, and OTAs is when it all comes together, because now teams they're allowed to do 7-on-7 drills, 9-on-7 drills, full team 11-on-11 drills, and that's the key thing. But what you have to remember here is there's still no contact allowed. So there's no hitting, no live contact. The players are still, for the most part, just in shorts and helmets, so what we call shells. But this is the opportunity for them to take what they've learned in the classroom environment and then install it on the field before training camp.
Is this the time of year where starters emerge? Is this where maybe we'll see a draft pick become a starter? And we obviously know that Patrick Mahomes is a starting quarterback and Travis Kelce is a tight end. But is this where we see George Karlaftis running with the ones sort of thing? And or does that come at St. Joe at training camp?
That's a very good question, Blair, because sometimes what you've seen with the Chiefs is OTAs gives them an opportunity to rotate people back and forth. And normally we wait until the first week of training camp before we figure out, okay, yeah, that's who's going to probably has the inside track to starting. But I'm going to go back to last year. Okay, with the offensive line, we knew what the Chiefs were thinking on the first day of OTAs. When we walked out there and we saw Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, and Lucas Niang working with the ones, and that was setting the table for training camp because that's exactly how they opened up. We should have a pretty good idea. This is what OTAs is about. Unfortunately, we can't report, personnel groupings out there, but this is the time of year where you're going to hear me say all the time, it wouldn't surprise if Blair Kirchhoff is your starting quarterback. So yeah, that's a good question. And you'll get a good opportunity here to see what the Chiefs are thinking.
Okay. There's some news yesterday, couple of free agent, well, not a couple, just one yesterday, free agent target, or at least somebody who's been associated, his name's been associated with the Chiefs, Jadeveon Clowney, re-signed with the Cleveland Browns, defensive end. And earlier, James Bradbury, the cornerback, signed with the Eagles. So those are a couple of possible free agents for the Chiefs that are no longer available. Does that mean the Chiefs are out of the market? What could the Chiefs do free agent wise between now and St. Joe? I got to think that there's still a couple of positions of need here.
Yeah, I think when you look at James Bradbury was linked to the Chiefs at the start of free agency. Okay, and then the draft happened. And after the draft, the reason why I never even considered Bradbury a viable target was because they traded for Lonnie Johnson. Once they did that, they filled that need at the cornerback position on top of drafting 3 more. Defensive end, hey, as Jesse has written a lot about, Melvin Ingram was somebody that they probably wanted to bring back, but he signed with Miami last week. So scratch off Ingram and scratch off Jadeveon Clowney. But you got to think defensive end might still be on the menu, a veteran guy that you can bring in probably at training camp, right, Jesse?
Yeah. So what's fascinating about this is that, I keep going back to Brett Veach here because he has an MO, which is whatever failed the Chiefs previously in the previous season, he goes out and he hammers normally the next season. We saw that after the Super Bowl where, they were one offensive lineman short. They shuffled around in losing in Tampa Bay, and they went out and they got offensive linemen. And it's interesting to hear him talk in the offseason. I think it was even on the Rich Eisen show. He talked a little bit about when the Tyreek Hill situation went down and they were looking at their options, and you got to pay Mahomes and you would have had to pay Tyreek Hill. And after that, he said, well, there wouldn't have been any money to go potentially sign a defensive end. So they kind of reshuffled things. And then the Tyreek Hill trade happened. They got some draft capital and went around and did things a different way. But it was interesting for him to say that, they were sort of looking like, how can they address defensive end if they have Tyreek Hill on the roster too? And they redid some things, but that remains the one big question mark, guys. I mean, if you would ask me after last season, the biggest question mark on the defense from what we saw late, and that would have been defensive end and pass rush, and something that, the Chiefs have valued over time with their defensive scheme. So it is interesting because you can say, okay, they got Frank Clark back and he's been inconsistent at best. I think we can all agree. They had Melvin Ingram, who kind of solidified them last year. Now he's gone to the Dolphins. You get George Karlaftis, but in a best case scenario, you're getting hopefully a steady contributor that can play a lot of snaps. And now you're another body short. And so you can hope on Joshua Kaindoh, who, hasn't shown too much yet, but is still pretty young. But I would be surprised if they don't address this somehow. Now, listen, last year they addressed it via a trade halfway through the year. This year with the schedule, it's a little bit tougher. I mean, I don't know that you can start off 3-4 again and hope to make the playoffs. So this is fascinating to me, kind of just from a big picture point of view, just because we know how Brett Veach operates. He usually does not let a weakness fester and be a greater weakness the next year. And it seems to me like defensive end kind of still sits like that for the Chiefs if you're just looking at, bright light weaknesses for them. So I'll be interested to see what happens here over the next few weeks to see if there's a trade or a signing. They do have some cap room, so it seems like there's some space available if they do want to make a move.
I'll go back to the 2018 season to Brett Veach wanting to identifying a position group and trying to correct it for the following year. And that's, that was the year the Chiefs lost to the Patriots in the AFC title game. The defense was atrocious most of the year. And right after within 2 days after the AFC title game, Bob Sutton was replaced as defensive coordinator. And Kansas City bid farewell to the likes of Justin Houston and Eric Berry and Dee Ford and Alan Bailey and just guys who had been stalwarts on the defensive side, and brought in people like Frank Clark and Tyrann Mathieu and others. So identified a need, made the changes. Chiefs went on to win the Super Bowl. And you're right, Jesse. 2 years later, they had the offensive line problem in the Super Bowl loss to the Bucs, and they went out and fixed all that. But as you said, I mean, we're looking at right now a defensive end rotation of Frank Clark, George Karlaftis, Mike Danna, Joshua Kaindoh, as just proven commodities returning, and that's not what I thought the Chiefs had in mind. That's not filling the hole there. So I think still work to do when it comes to that position. Don't you think, Herb?
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that as well. When you mentioned Danna and you mentioned Kaindoh, these are two of their draft picks over the last 2 seasons. Okay, so Danna he's serviceable because if you remember last year when Frank Clark missed a good chunk of the first half of the season, Danna had 3 sacks in there, subbing for Frank Clark. Joshua Kaindoh was hurt last year, so he didn't really have an opportunity to develop and learn that scheme. Remember, he was on injured reserve, then they pulled him back, but that's a lot of lost time. I think what you're probably going to end up seeing happening is kind of like what they did last summer at the start of training camp. They brought back Alex Okafor, and he, by the way, is still a free agent, but he's a guy that you can bring in because he knows the scheme. But whatever they do here, if it is a free agent signing and it's a veteran, this is a stopgap fix. This isn't someone that they're going to have for years and years because they missed that boat. Free agency was the opportunity to get someone who was going to be here 2 or 3 years. So whoever they get now is just going to be someone who's going to help them out for this year only.
And I think stopgap's a perfect word, Herbie, because let's not get lost in the weeds here. Like, they still have Patrick Mahomes. They still have all these offensive weapons. They still have a lot of great things going for them, and they upgraded in the draft. But if we're talking Danna, Kaindoh, some of these guys, Karlaftis, even, you don't know the answer. You know what I mean? So you're kind of just trying to push this thing into the future. And even if you potentially could make a trade like they did with Melvin Ingram last year, you have to come up with some solutions early to kind of at least buy you some time to see if, and again, all things equal, they'd love for Danna and they'd love for Kaindoh to step up and be those guys. And maybe they are those guys, but right now you're not in a position with the Chiefs to say, oh, they're going to go 4-13 anyway. That's not a big of a deal. No, they've got expectations this year. They have expectations in week 1, and they've got tough games in week 1, week 2, week 3. So yeah, they need something to kind of fill that gap to figure out what you have. And so that's why this has sort of been, I mean, a lot of what they've done in the offseason makes a lot of sense. And this has sort of been the most one that kind of just lingers out there as a question. Like, they need something to get them to whatever's next, and they don't know what's next yet. So some sort of signing like Oak Ford make a lot of sense to kind of have that, but it seems like they need another body there, and that should come at some point in time. I at least would expect that.
I thought maybe they would have taken a second rush end in the draft. Karlaftis, of course, was a first round pick and had 8 picks after the first round to make a move, and instead a couple of safeties, more cornerbacks. They really addressed the back end, but that was it for the front end of the defense, which surprised me a little bit.
Yeah, you're not wrong, Blair, because it actually surprised me as well. Even if you grab a defensive lineman who gives you flexibility to play inside and outside, they needed to add another body because Colin Saunders is in the final year of his deal. Derek Nottie was only brought back on a 1-year deal. So you've got some holes there as well at defensive tackle after the 2022 season. So I actually, if you remember my mocks, I actually had them taking at least 2 defensive linemen, one guy who can rush the passer, and another guy who gave them that flexibility. But like you said, they went the defensive backs route. And, when you look at the AFC West, what happened there during the offseason, maybe that was the wise move, because some of these passing offenses in the AFC West, goodness gracious, it's a fantasy football team.
Yeah, you're right, Herbie. And if we did want to look at weaknesses, defensive backfield for the Chiefs in their last 2 games last year, you could definitely point to that as well. You've talked with him more, so I kind of wanted to throw this back at you to see too. I mean, I think maybe what might be most confusing, Ingram seemed like a great fit to come back, and the Chiefs showed interest in him coming back. And I'm not one to poo-poo $500,000 or whatever, but are you surprised at all that Ingram didn't have more interest coming back to the Chiefs and that Miami was able to land him? Because if you asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have thought that Melvin Ingram was going to come back to the Chiefs and he was going to be that stopgap that they needed and kind of a perfect fit in that sort of role.
Yeah, but you got to also go back to last year. Okay, the Chiefs were one of Melvin Ingram's first free agency visits when the Chargers decided not to bring him back, and it came down to money, which is why the Steelers signed him. And again, when you look at what he signed for in Miami, now you're saying to yourself, okay, yeah, the Chiefs were not going to pay that for a 30-plus-year-old pass rusher there. And it always comes down to money. And you know what? For these defensive players, unlike Jadeveon Clowney, who reportedly took less to return to Cleveland, I don't fault NFL players whatsoever. If they know this is one of their final contracts in the NFL, go get paid. And if the Dolphins were going to back up the Brinks truck for him and the Chiefs weren't, go to Miami.
Just devil's advocate here, Herbie. If he's a perfect fit and knows the scheme and is the perfect stopgap, and it leaves the Chiefs not feeling like they are right now, is there an argument to pay him a little bit more money?
Yeah, of course. But are you willing to do it though? That's the whole thing.
And you don't know what he was thinking either. I mean, maybe he was introduced to Miami. I don't know. I don't know if there's been a media op for him there, but maybe somewhat like Tyreek Hill, he had a hankering to be somewhere else. Just wanted to be in Miami. Who knows? Hey, before we get off the defensive line, though, we failed to mention Turk Wharton, who's a guy who could fit in both on the inside and the outside, and he's a guy who has played above his expectation based on how he was acquired. And Herbie, in doing the pre-OTA breakdown, when you took the broke down in both offense and defense, you also had when you did the position groups, you listed a wild card player by the position, and for the defensive line, you've listed Malik Herring. Tell us about, remember him from last year. I remember him from last year. I remember when they acquired him and thinking, this guy, keep an eye on this guy. Undrafted free agent out of Georgia, I believe. And what's his upside? What's his potential?
Pass rushing, the whole deal. And we know the Chiefs love players from the SEC. You look at their roster, it's full of players from the SEC. And Malik Herring is a guy that's very intriguing because of that. And he was on the non-football injury list last year. I cannot remember what his injury was it's always escaping my mind right now, but he spent the entire year on the NFI list. And he had the opportunity not just to rehab, but to be around the team facilities, learn the playbook, learn what the defense is going to expect. And I'll say this, okay? I want to be cautious when I look at plays during rookie mini camp, but he made a play that just like all of us were like, holy smokes. Rushed up the gap, batted the ball up in the air, and intercepted it, was not touched, got up and ran in for what would have been a touchdown. Okay, now take that for a grain of salt because this is rookie minicamp. Nobody knows the plays. Again, we go back to no contact allowed, so the blockers aren't able to put him on his butt, but he was able to get in the backfield and disrupt the play. You got to he is a wild card because when you mentioned Turk Wharton, he was an undrafted guy that all of a sudden emerged in training camp and made the roster. Is Malik Herring that next guy? Could be.
Real quick, torn ACL at the Senior Bowl for Herring. So that was what allowed the Chiefs to have kind of a development year for him last year. But you're right, Herbie. Being out there rookie minicamp, you try not to make too much of it. But if you wanted to pick out one of the top 3 plays of the 3 days that we were there, that was definitely one of them.
All right, guys, we're going to stay on the defensive side, but first we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back on SportsBeat KC.
Buying your first home is a huge milestone, but the journey there can be confusing. First Federal Bank of Kansas City is here to make it simple. After nearly a century of serving the KC community, our loan advisors have experience in every type of housing market. With a short phone call, we can give you a free rate quote and talk through loan options. No pressure, no obligation. The road to home ownership can be simple with First Federal Bank. Get started with a free quote at ffbkc.com/homes. First Federal Bank of Kansas City, because banking is personal. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
Hey, this is Blair. There are several ways to access the Star Sports section. Let me tell you about a couple of them. There is Sports Pass. For $12.99 a month, you get unlimited digital access to all of the Star Sports content, including beat writing, columns, features, pretty much everything we write. The deal renews monthly until you tell us to cancel. For $159.99 a year, you get everything the Star has to offer digitally, including sports and the e-edition. Go to kansascity.com and drop down to the bottom of the page where it says Start a Subscription for more information. Your support has never been more important. As always, thanks for reading and listening. We are back on SportsBeat Kansas City talking Chiefs with Herbie Teope and Jesse Newell. OTAs start this week. They start Thursday or Friday? I can't remember. Thursday. Thanks, Herbie. And there'll actually be media availability this week and for the next 3 Thursdays. So you'll get to hear from Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, assistant coaches, and some of the players that we're talking about here today. We covered the defensive line in the first part of the show. Let's move back to the linebackers. And I think we all agree Willie Gay, Nick Bolton are the bedrock of the linebacking core. Leo Chanel, the draft pick out of Wisconsin, we think is going to get every opportunity to be an impact player in the linebacking core. And the Chiefs went out and signed a couple of NFL veterans at that position as well, didn't they, Herbie? Elijah Lee being one of them, Jermaine Carter. So they've got to make up for the loss of Anthony Hitchens, and also gone is Dorian O'Daniel, but I think this is a pretty solid position for the Chiefs.
Yeah, I think it is a solid position as well. And when you look at this group, there's not as many questions as there are everywhere else. You have Gay and you have Bolton as your foundation. Leo Chanel, I'm going to go ahead and pencil him in right now as the starting strong side linebacker. What they're going to need to do, the Chiefs typically carry 5 to 6 linebackers to start the year. And those other 3 linebackers, or probably 2, are going to have to be able to contribute on special teams because someone's going to need to make up for Ben Neiman and Dorian O'Daniel no longer on the team. And the two guys you mentioned there, Jermaine Carter, extensive special teams experience with the Carolina Panthers. Elijah Lee, he's a K-Stater, so, he's going to bring all the heart in the world. He also has a ton of special teams experience. So, if I look at the roster now, and Darius Harris, don't forget him, he's returning. Right. He was one of their core special teams contributors every time he was called up from the practice squad. So those three probably have the inside track. And if the Chiefs go with 5 linebackers, then there's going to be a battle for those final 2 spots.
Yeah, so every time, just as a programming note, every time we mention a player who attended Kansas State University, we have to stop, pause, and acknowledge the greatness of the Kansas State program. The other cool thing about Elijah Lee is from Blue Springs. So it's always cool to have a local product there. I can't wait I'm sure we'll get to talk to him soon. It'll be fun just to discuss what it was like growing up basically in the shadow of Arrowhead Stadium. So, yeah. So 5 to 6 is what they end up keeping, you think? And special teams come out of this group as well. You better be, maybe Dave Tobe will always have a say in what players that make the team. So yeah, linebacker seems solid to me. Let's go to the secondary, where there has been big turnover and there'll be some big changes. And you mentioned Lonnie Johnson earlier, Herbie. He's kind of I don't know if forgotten's the right word, but whenever I'm thinking about the corners with L'Jarius Sneed and Rashad Fenton and McDuffie, the draft pick, I tend to forget about Lonnie Johnson, but he's they picked him up for a reason, didn't they? I mean, he's gonna factor into this thing.
Yeah, and we don't forget, and to me it was interesting that Brett Veach revealed that they actually had interest in him before last year's trade deadline, which ultimately resulted in them going a different direction and trading for Melvin Ingram instead. So less than a year later, they get the guy that they wanted. NFL experience, has position flexibility, can play safety and cornerback, and we know Steve Spagnuolo loves those kinds of players. The other guy to not forget about, DeAndre Baker. We always seem to forget about DeAndre Baker, and that the fact is he is a former first-round draft pick with the New York Giants. So when you think of him, he's healthy now, or at least he should be healthy now from that devastating broken leg that he suffered back in the end of the 2020 season. Last year, he was still trying to get healthy. This year, hey, if he's 100% healthy and still has any of that first-round talent, he might surprise this year as well.
Former first-round pick of the New York Giants, DeAndre Baker. Yeah. Now at safety, we've got Juan Thornhill, Justin Reed, Deion Bush, Brian Cook, the draft pick. Jesse, it's a whole new look back there, though, because of Tyrann Mathieu's absence. And, we kid a lot about Daniel Sorensen, and he certainly was, had moments of regret for Chiefs fans, but look, he was a steady presence there and a longtime Chief. So they got a little work to do at safety, don't they?
Well, yeah, this is the fascinating part of it, because this is what Brett Veach talked about late in the draft, where they threw numbers at the secondary position, and instead of guys looking as undrafted free agents and saying, hey, I really see a crowded house there, I'm not going to sign with the Chiefs. The Chiefs said, we're going to use these 7th round picks and take a bunch of these dudes and see if they work out and see how they turn out. So there's gonna be a lot of guys battling for positions back there, but yeah, among the front, you've got, Justin Reed and then, Brian Cook, 2nd round pick. And it sure seems like those guys have the versatility the Chiefs are going to like at that position and give them more versatile options than they had a season ago. But yeah, on the back end, then you've got a bunch of dudes that, potentially, if you're counting the safeties and the cornerbacks, where it's like the Chiefs just threw a bunch of numbers here, and then we'll see how it all shakes out. And I know one of those guys, I want to give you a shout out, Blair, because we can talk a little bit about Jalen Watson. I know you enjoyed writing about him and his story when he came to talk to us here at Rookie Minicamp.
Yeah. Just, fun guy. And he was of course, the player, well traveled. It's one thing to go from to go from your high school to college and maybe back to junior college and then to a 4-year school. He did this going across the country doing it. He's from Augusta, Georgia, and ended up going to junior college in California, came back home when he actually signed with USC coming out of junior college in California, but didn't have the grades. So he came back home to work he came back home because his grade didn't have the grades, living in Augusta at home, needed to get a job, couldn't get one except at a Wendy's where his mother served as the manager. And man, did he not like that. So not a great experience. His inspiration for getting his grades in order, returning to college, ended up at Washington State. And was fun to hear him discuss all that. It was, as you and I and Herbie talked about it afterwards, sometimes these rookies open up a little bit more in their first media experience with, his NFL players. And so he was willing to share some insights about that. It was good. But hey, Herbie, I want to get back to you're picking wild card players, and you have one at this position as well, Deon Key. Let's tell us about him.
Yeah, another undrafted free agent last year at camp, and this is the beauty of training camp. We see them in pads, we see them starting to emerge, and the thing that jumped out to all of us at training camp last year was the fact that Deon Key ended up working with the ones. He was out there drawing repetitions with the first team defense leading up to that first preseason game. Unfortunately, that preseason game was against the 49ers. And then he had those 2 brutal plays where he gave up a touchdown and then he disappeared. But the Chiefs thought enough of him to bring him back, sign him to the practice squad, and give him the opportunity to learn even more. So if he takes that lesson from last year and the fact, if it's sticking in his head, hey, they thought high enough of me to work me in with the 1s and 2s, he's a guy to look out for. It may not happen during OTAs, but once the pads come on, we got to see where these guys are. And that's the key thing. When the pads come on, before we were able to finally evaluate all these positions, especially when it comes to tackling and the contact aspect of football.
Hey, can Juan Thornhill be an effective center fielder type of safety? That to me is the Chiefs are really going to have to look at that and have somebody be that person. Is he that person?
Yeah, it's either going to be Juan Thornhill or Justin Reed because both of them have free safety experience. So one of the two are going to be back there. Thornhill, obviously, I think he has the experience because they use Tyrann Mathieu more as a strong safety, as a traditional strong safety, sliding him into the box to defend against the run. So Thornhill has that experience. Remember, last year it was all about, is he finally healthy? We were really surprised when Daniel Sorensen started the year because all we heard throughout camp was Thornhill is finally healthy. 2 years now removed from an ACL. This might be the year where he's starting to show like that form he had in 2019. If not for that torn ACL, he had an argument for Defensive Rookie of the Year, in my opinion.
No, I agree. He was on the All-Rookie team. Remember? So no, he definitely made his mark, and it's just been interesting with him since then. And but it seems like they're counting on him big time this year. And Justin Reed, is he more of a Tyrann Mathieu type of safety where he runs? We see him in run support a lot. I just don't know. That's one of the curiosities for me as we look at questions about the Chiefs. How they just kind of what the roles are at safety. And one thing I want to circle back to something while we're still talking about the secondary, and this is kind of a side note, but L'Jarius Sneed had a little bit of a scare last week, didn't he? With his car in his native Louisiana. All's well that ends well there, I suspect. Nobody was hurt, but guy's got his car shot up. That's not the kind of off-season story you want to hear from a Chiefs player.
Yeah, it happened in Minden, Louisiana. He's in town visiting. He was not at his vehicle. That's the good news. There's also nobody was hurt. That's the other good news. And according to the Minden Police Department, they're investigating it now. They questioned Snead, let him go, obviously, because he's not involved in that. But there is an investigation into who shot up his vehicle. And it's a shame that happened, especially with a Chiefs player or anybody. You're a victim of random violence, and it just happened to be his vehicle.
Okay. Hey, guys, we're not going to talk again until after the OTAs begin. Is there anything in particular, or any player that you're really keeping an eye on? Anybody that has you pretty curious now that we're going to see, all the players together? We'll talk about offense in greater detail next week, but just for just taking into account the entire squad, is there somebody, Jesse, or position group or player that you're pretty curious about going into this thing?
Well, it'll be my rookie voyage into this too, so I will defer mostly to Herbie on this sort of thing. But it seems to me like OTAs, and Herbie referenced this before, is a lot of times rookies can come in and you see the different body types. You see the pro athletes, their eyes are really wide. You're starting to kind of figure out where you're going to fit in. You're trying to figure out the playbook with everybody else, all those sorts of things. But as Herbie mentioned last year, for a guy like Creed Humphrey and for Trey Smith to step right in and be on the first team reps, that sort of thing, I guess I'm probably gonna be most interested in the rookies. The Chiefs seem to have drafted most of those top guys with the intention of them playing right away. So are they going to fit in? Are they going to be ready to step in? And again, this is an early point, so it's not the end all be all if they're not ready. But I think they do need these guys to step in right away and act like they belong, and they have so far. And we'll see if that continues at OTAs.
The two I'm going to be looking at, you mentioned the rookies, Darian Kennard. Okay, that right tackle position on the Chiefs offense has the biggest question mark right now because Lucas Niang is not expected to be back from his knee injury or recovery from his knee injury until likely the end of training camp. So Andrew Wiley is going to be holding down the fort, but how much competition is he going to get from Darian Kennard? The other spot I'm going to look at, it is the offensive line, is who's the swing tackle? Because we don't expect to see Orlando Brown Jr. out there. Folks, remember, he has not signed his franchise tag yet. The Chiefs have until July the 15th, so he's not going to be out there anyway because even though it's voluntary and even the mandatory minicamp, he's not under contract as of right now. So we need to figure out who that swing tackle is. And probably the guy who's going to have the first shot at it is their free agent signing, Jerron Christian. So I need to see who their swing tackle is out there as well.
We'll get into that in a bigger way when we talk again. One thing that I guess we can count on seeing or knowing is wide receivers will look good. Defense will look, question marky because you just can't tell. As you said, Herbie, there are no pads here, but there'll be some great catches, right? That's always the highlight of OTA, just guys making great catches. And I'll give you a name of somebody I'm going to kind of be curious about. I'll go back over to the defensive side. Mike Rose, the linebacker from Iowa State. He was Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year a couple years ago. Unexpectedly undrafted. Talking to him, and we'll see if he can make an impression for the Chiefs. I actually think he'll end up with a contract and will he be one of the 53? We'll have to see. But I think he's got a shot at making this team. All right, Herbie Teope, Jesse Newell talking Chiefs. Always a pleasure, guys. We will do it again soon. That'll do it for today's show, presented by First Federal Bank. Thanks to Monty Davis for producing, and to the production team of Randy Mason, Jeff Rosen, and Chris Fickett. Tip of the cap to Herbie Teope and Jesse Newell for sharing their insights. Morning Sports Edition was 34 pages today. I got all the local stories. I even made it through coverage of that dreadful Royals loss on Sunday, plus national stories like the PGA, the final day of the English Premier League, the NBA and NHL playoffs, and the weekend in auto racing. Go to liveedition.kansascity.com. That's live edition, one word, .kansascity.com. Hey, thanks for listening, and we'll be back on Tuesday with another Sports Beat KC.